Making up only 20% of the current population in Hawaii, Native Hawaiians, like most indigenous and aboriginal people around the world, have suffered atrocious hardships. Extreme depopulation, loss of land, poverty, political marginalization, military occupation, loss of mother tongue, high incarceration rates, inadequate health and education profile, and increasing diaspora. How did so many sovereign indigenous nations come to the state in which we see them today? In the case of the Native Hawaiians, Western economic and political processes impose capitalist laws and principles which are ultimately at odds with indigenous knowledge and ways of living. Western planning was and still is a tool used by the states and capital to control indigenous people. The way in which we plan with and for indigenous communities needs to change. Before Western influence, the concept of private property did not exist, but Native Hawaiians did follow a complex economic and land division system. Hawaiians had a subsistence economy based upon a hupua'a, a land unit that runs from the mountains to the sea. These land units were worked on cooperatively by communities, and people found or grew whatever they needed for their lives on their ahupua'a. While there was no private ownership of land, Hawaiian commoners' tenure was stable. Because the early Hawaiians depended on nature for everything, the kapu system, laws, was intimately connected with reverence and respect for the natural world. Furthermore, Hawaiians extended elements of Hawaiian spirituality into the natural landscape. With the kapu system, Native Hawaiians' aloha aina, love of the land, ensured respectful and sustainable use of their land's resources. Amongst the first things to abruptly end the social and economic structure was the concept of private property. The introduction of land privatization was not well relayed to most commoners, and most people lost the right to the land in which their ancestors lived and worked on due to a land grab by the island's elite. This land loss not only disrupted Native Hawaiians' communal lifestyle, but it effectively decimated the connection to their physical, cultural, and spiritual sustenance. Land no longer became guaranteed for common Native Hawaiians, as leaders of Hawaii made a place for industries like sugar and pineapple plantations for Western capital and trade. When capitalism became the dominant economic system in Hawaii, Native Hawaiians were absolutely disadvantaged when it came to keeping their lands and preserving their ways of living. Since initial Western contact with Hawaii, the capitalization of land has led to the extreme industrialization and development of Hawaii. Lands and waters have been taken for resorts, urbanization, military bases, and plantation agriculture, even though Native Hawaiians and other groups ardently contest these actions by the state and private companies. As more and more people move to paradise, capital and government create the space needed to accommodate wealthy settler colonials. However, islands are truly limited in space and resources. The influx of demand for housing and development for rich people from the American continent has been pushing Native Hawaiians to the margins for decades. In fact, the 2000 census showed that there are more Native Hawaiians living on the mainland than in Hawaii, most likely because of the dire economic conditions they face at home. An example of the change in which Native Hawaiians face in their communities is the 1970 Kalama'a Valley eviction on Oahu Island. Rural Hawaiians who were living month-to-month leases on land owned by one of Hawaii's largest trusts, Bishop Estate, were given 1 month to pack and leave the homes and farms they've been living on for 20 years. Outrage and protests were heard across the islands, but the movement ultimately failed to stop the development of their farms into upper-income properties. This is a very typical example and outcome of native land dispute in Hawaii. Time and time again, developments are built on beaches, sacred land is occupied by the government, farmland are raised for resorts. Planners work side by side with developers to permit these types of expansion in Hawaii. Western planning substantiates these capitalist development rights and private property laws which perpetuate the harm incurred by Native Hawaiians. The immeasurable harm which Western planning has helped inflict on Hawaiian and other indigenous people over centuries cannot be taken back. Moving forward, however, can planning help indigenous people thrive? Within the field of planning, indigenous planning is the idea of planning that is done by and for indigenous people. It is planning that is attuned to indigenous people's traditional and present knowledge and systems. For planners who are not indigenous, when called upon, we need to recognize the validity of indigenous planning and advocate for indigenous people's desired ways of living over capitalist principles.